This is a very important video for you to watch, especially if you have not taken the equivalent of English Composition 2 yet in college. This video is going to be about the basics of citing your sources. You must cite your sources in this course. So I'm going to describe when you should cite your sources. I'm going to talk about how to cite sources appropriately, how to paraphrase material, what that means, and how to use direct quotes. There's going to be a follow-up video after this one that's going to be specific to the citation format that your class is going to use. So whenever you use information from somewhere else, you have to cite it. This is true even when you put the information into your own words. So most students by this stage in their academic careers know that when you take a direct quote from somewhere, you have to cite that. We know that for a direct quote, we put in quotation marks and we cite it. You also have to cite when you've put information into your own words, when you've paraphrased or summarized the information. You have to cite. There are different citation styles out there. Most disciplines have their own. The three most common in undergraduate education are MLA, which is what you will or were likely taught in English Comp. There is APA, which is used in psychology and education and the social sciences. There is Turabian, which is also called Chicago style, which is used in history and religious studies. Some social science fields like political science and fields like geography, some instructors or some institutions prefer that Turabian is used and some prefer that APA is used. Now, I'm going to talk in my follow-up what I want you to use in the course you have from me. If you're reviewing this in some other semester and you don't have me for a course, ask your instructor what their preference is after reading the instructions, because they may say what their preference is. And again, there will be a follow-up presentation where I'll talk about more about the style that I want you to use for this class. So first, let's talk about when you don't have to cite. If something is common knowledge, if an educated adult knows the information, you don't need to cite that. So ask yourself questions like these. Did you know this before you read it? Could you have explained it to someone else? Was the same information found in multiple sources, usually at least 3, that didn't cite each other or cite a common source? And again, is it something an educated adult could be expected to know? So you might not remember the capital of Louisiana is Baton Rouge, but it's common information that someone could reasonably be expected to know. Right now in the US, there are around 300 million people. If you say there are around 300 million people in the US, you don't need to cite that. If you give an exact figure of how many people are in the US, if you go to the census site and look up what the last census said, you should cite that. So common knowledge doesn't have to be cited, but anything beyond that does. Now, what you need to use are parenthetical citations. Those of you who are going to be history majors are going to be introduced at some point to Turabian and will use footnotes. In the classes that I teach at the undergraduate level, I don't require footnotes to be used. I would prefer that you not use them because they just add more confusion sometimes, especially in an online class teaching situation. So we're going to use parenthetical citations. These are also called in-text citations or internal citations, and they're called parenthetical because they use parentheses. Whenever you use information from a source, you have to use a parenthetical citation. Use it immediately after the information. Now, if all the information in a paragraph or all the information in like the first 4 sentences of a paragraph comes from the same source, just cite it once at the end of the last sentence where that information is used. Typically, I expect to see at least 1 internal citation per paragraph. It's okay to have the same citation in multiple paragraphs, and it's okay to have more than 1 citation in a paragraph. Again, put citations after information you found from a source. Put them in a way so that your reader can tell what's your opinion or interpretation versus what isn't, versus what comes from the source. And again, if you have a bunch of sentences in a row that come from the same source, you can just cite at the last sentence. Paraphrasing is putting information entirely into your own words. It is not the same as just finding synonyms for the words in the original. So this is hard to show in a quick example because we can't really you can't accurately paraphrase a sentence. When you paraphrase, you're paraphrasing information from a paragraph, from a page, from an entire article. But so, for example, if the original said the king ruled harshly, and you wrote the monarch reigned strictly, all you've done there is you found synonyms for each word. You haven't really paraphrased it. Paraphrasing is putting something entirely into your own words. That also includes often your own syntax, your own word order. Regardless, you have to cite when you paraphrase. Please use internal citations. Similarly, a summary is more general than a paraphrase. A paraphrase is usually tied to material on a couple of pages, 1 or 2 pages of an article or a book. A summary is more general. We might summarize an entire article, an entire section, an entire chapter, even an entire book. Summaries also need parenthetical citations. Now, if you're summarizing an entire chapter or book and it's truly a summary, then you don't need a page number in that summary. Direct quotes. You seldom need to use direct quotes. If you do, make sure that you have gotten it exactly 100% correct. Triple check for typos. A good rule of thumb is that no more than 10% of a paper should be direct quotes. So if you are writing a 500-word essay, no more than 50 of those words should be in quotation marks. Direct quotes, of course, are put in quotation marks. They're cited. If you leave material out, you use those 3 dots called an ellipses. If you add material, put it in brackets. And by brackets, we mean square brackets, not parentheses. The word sick is used when material in a direct quote is either inaccurate or sometimes if it would be considered offensive today. It's usually better to restate the material, but if you can't restate it, put sick, and it's again in brackets, and the word sick is italicized immediately after the material that's incorrect. Don't use it if you're quoting historical documents that are spelled correctly for that time period. So spelling changes over time. Similarly, if you are looking at British sources and they're using British spellings and they're putting a U in the word color, you don't need to put sick after that. Avoid overusing sick. Whenever you make a change in a direct quote, please add that change in brackets. So you might change the tense, for example. So an example there, you might change the word result to resulted to match the tense of your paper. That's fine to do as long as it doesn't affect the meaning of the quote. Using ellipses or making changes with brackets to change the meaning of a quote is unethical. Now, if you have a lengthy quote, special rules apply, and those rules vary kind of dramatically depending whether you're using MLA, APA, or Turabian. So I'm not going to go into those here. Look them up if you Google block quote and then whatever it is you're looking for, you'll find out how to do it. In the papers you're writing for my classes, you should not be using block quotes. A block quote is typically either 40 words or it's 4 lines that all come from the same source in a row. If you're using a block quote, it probably means that you don't really understand the information well enough to summarize it. So I would avoid block quotes. If there is no author, so in a citation, which you'll see in the next presentation, we use in parentheses the author's last name, the year, and the page number usually. If there's no author, use a shortened version of the title of the article or the title of the web page that you are citing. If there's an editor listed instead of an author, include the editor's name instead of the author's name. Don't use the editors of history.com, the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica, if that's all you see. In a case like that, use a version of the title of the entry or the article that you are citing. In addition to internal citations, You also need a references page, which is sometimes called works cited or bibliography. It has very specific requirements that we'll discuss in the follow-up video. Here are just some general guidelines. Every citation in your paper must tie to an entry in your references list. Every entry in the reference list must tie to an internal citation in your paper. References are usually alphabetized by the last name of the first author listed if there's more than one author. And references provide the publication information so others can easily find the material. Please do not give me a list of URLs as your reference page. Don't do that. Book references usually require that you know the names of the authors, the title and subtitle of the book, the copyright year of the book, the edition if it's not the first edition, the publisher, and usually the place or city of publication. For articles, it's a little more complicated. There are three main types of articles: journals, magazines, and newspapers. Most academic writing really strongly prefers journal articles. For journals, you need, again, authors' names, the journal title, the article title, the volume, the number, the journal year or month and year, the page range, and the DOI, which is a specific URL that goes directly to that journal article, if it is available. Magazines are really similar, except they don't include the volume number, and newspapers are handled like magazines are, basically. So what is a journal? A journal is a specialized scholarly publication. So magazines are intended for a general audience. So National Geographic is a magazine. It's a good magazine. It has useful articles in it. But the articles are written typically by journalists, not by expert geographers. A journal in geography would be written specifically for professional geographers or people studying geography in like graduate school. Journal articles are usually peer-reviewed, which means rather than just an editor reading them over, they are sent anonymously to experts in the field. So if I'm writing an essay on the economic development of Mexico in the 1860s, and I wrote an article about that to a journal, and it was a peer-reviewed journal, what would happen is the editor of the journal would probably first look at my article to see if it looked appropriate for that journal. And then they would send it to experts in that specific field. And they'd say, hey, Carl Lund has submitted this article, please review it. And much like a professor would give you feedback on an essay you write for them, those experts in the field would give feedback on the essay. It may be that, oh my goodness, this paper is awful, don't ever bother us again. Hopefully the feedback would be more positive than that, more useful, but it would be critical feedback. It's not unusual for articles in a journal to go through multiple revisions before they're accepted. It's also not unusual for journals to reject almost all of the articles that are submitted to them. I sit on the publications committee for the National Association of Gifted Children as I record this. And I believe their journal is called Gifted Child Quarterly, and their rejection rate is something like 90%. They rejected 90% of the submissions that are received to that journal. We can argue whether that's good or bad, but that's how journals work. Typically, a journal includes a volume number, abbreviated often as VOL period. This simply tells you how long the journal's been published. So volume 25 means it is the 25th year of publication. Volume is usually followed by number, and that's the number of the issue published that year. So if a journal had volume 10, number 2, that would mean the 10th year of publication, the second issue of that year. And then when you're citing a web page, the requirements of this vary depending on citation style, but typically you need the author of the web page. If there's no author, then you need the sponsoring organization of the web page if that's available. You need the date. You need a title of the web page. Now, a web page, of course, won't have page numbers, so when you are citing it, you are going to use paragraph numbers, and you're going to count those by hand rather than page numbers. There are lots of good internet resources to help you with citing. I will link to some of them in your course. Please use them. In general, the institution that you're at has a writing center available to you, including online. Take advantage of that. Ignorance is not an excuse of the rules. You must cite your sources. You must cite your sources. Please, 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 please cite your sources. If you have questions, please let me know. Thanks for listening.